today I want to speak about Daniel and honoring God in our youth. We're going to start with a few key lessons from Daniel. The first lesson is obedience. I'm going to read Daniel 1 verse 8. But Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and wine given to them by the king. He asked the chief of staff for permission not to eat these unacceptable foods. So what I picked up from reading this verse is that Daniel refused to defile himself. He was intentional in honoring God. He made a decision in his heart that this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to honor God with everything in me. In everything that I do, I will be obedient to God.
Amen.
The second thing we learn from the book of Daniel is humility. In James 4 verse 6 it says, and he gives grace generously. As the scriptures say, God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. In Daniel 4 verse 33 to 34, it says, that same hour the judgment was fulfilled, and Nebuchadnezzar was driven from human society. He ate grass like a cow, and he was drenched with the dew of heaven. He lived this way until his hair was as long as eagle's feathers, and his nails were like bird's claws. After this time had passed, I, Nebuchadnezzar, looked up to heaven. My sanity returned, and I praised and worshipped the Most High, and honored the one who lives forever. His rule is everlasting, and his kingdom is eternal. So when we read that King Nebuchadnezzar was a very prideful king. So essentially God had to put him in his place. And he was put in his place. He was humiliated in front of his whole kingdom that he ruled. However, luckily for him, he turned to God and worshipped him. Number 3, we learn dependence on God. In Proverbs 3, verse 5 to 6, it says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek his will in all you do, and he will show you which path to take. Daniel 6 verse 10 says, but when Daniel learned that the law had been signed, he went home and knelt down as usual in his upstairs room, with its windows open toward Jerusalem. He prayed 3 times a day, just as he had always done, giving thanks to God. So just to paint a picture of what was happening before, the other administrators and governors of the kingdom could see Daniel was worth something. They could see he had a brighter future. They wanted to find a way to accuse him, but they couldn't accuse him because Daniel was faithful. He was always responsible. He was completely trustworthy. So the only way they knew they could attack him was by his religion. And they went to the king, King Darius, and said that for 30 days, whoever worships a god or an idol should be put in the lion's den. And they knew that Daniel, because he honored God, he wasn't going to listen, and that was them setting a trap for him. But Daniel knew this, and instead of fleeing or getting scared, the first thing he did was knelt down on his knees and pray in his prayer room. He worshipped God amidst everything that was happening around him. Secondly, I want to move on to the results of honoring God. The first is God makes you beautiful. Daniel 1 verse 15 says, at the end of the 10 days, Daniel and his 3 friends looked healthier and better nourished than the young men who had been eating the food assigned by the king. So, I don't want to be mean there, but if you're ugly, just honor God. You'll be fine. Okay, secondly, God gives us gifts. In Daniel 1 verse 17 it says, God gave these 4 young men an unusual aptitude for understanding every aspect of literature and wisdom. And God gave Daniel the special ability to interpret the meanings of visions and dreams. So, if you honor God, you'll get nice things, guys. Let's just understand that. If you want nice things, honor God. Number 3, he promotes us. Daniel 2 verse 48, then the king appointed Daniel to a high position and gave him many valuable gifts. He made Daniel ruler over the whole province of Babylon, as well as chief over all his wise men. Okay. Number 4, he protects us. Daniel 3 verse 27 says, then the high officers Officials, governors, and advisors crowded around them and saw that the fire had not touched them. Not a hair on their heads was singed, and their clothing was not scorched. They didn't even smell of smoke. We are all familiar with the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, so I don't really need to go into that because we know they were protected. Okay. In conclusion, as the youth, we should learn to put our pride aside and be intentional in honoring God despite the external pressures we face. We should be careful of what we feed our spirit man. For example, our spirit feeds on things just as our flesh does. And then I'm going to say they're kind of, I don't know how to explain it, but there are things that I refer to as eye gates and ear gates. Eye gates are the things we watch because they affect our spirit man as well. So if you're watching things you're not supposed to, they're going to affect your mindset and the way you see the world. But if you feed your spirit man the things you're supposed to be feeding it, such as watching sermons or listening to Bishop's sermons, your spirit man will be fed in a good way. And the second thing is the ear gates. The things we listen to are very important. I always like to make an example that when you listen to gospel music or you listen to praise and worship music, the presence of God is around you. So if you're listening to secular music, we know secular music worships the things of the world and the devil. So whose presence do you think is there if you're listening to secular music? I'm just saying we should be very careful. For me, I think the music one is the most important because obviously when we're having conversations with the people around us, for teenagers especially, we like to speak about music and your favorite artist dropped a new album and then you don't want to be left out, so you go and listen to that. But we should understand we are set apart. We are not the same. We are not the same. You can't put yourself in the same shoes as people who live for the world. And lastly, I'm going to read 1 Timothy 4 verse 12. Don't let anyone think less of you because you are young. Be an example to all believers in what you say, in the way you live, in your love, your faith, and your purity.